Hello, welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, folks, this is episode 101. That's what Rob tells me. At least I'm basing that on the assumption last episode with Bob Kiviat was number 100, of course, and we talked about a lot of different things. Before I introduce our guest for tonight, which is a wonderful gentleman, great humanitarian, very smart guy, trust me, you'll certainly appreciate that by the time this show is over. Lonnie Franks is joining us tonight, but before we have Lonnie on, I just want to mention something that I completely forgot to mention, I'm sorry, at the opening of the 100th anniversary show, which I was actually excited for. Usually I'm not an anniversary kind of guy, but number 100, wow, 100 under the belt, starting from the Middle East. Anyway, make a long story short, when I was there a couple years ago and made the decision to broadcast from the Middle East, it was because it was obvious to me, especially being Jewish and living in India and having been over there. I actually had a girlfriend there too. Yes, I'm revealing part of my life there. No longer with her, but we were together at the time. Anyway, I actually considered living there because I was going to be working for a large newspaper there. And I even met with the people from Syria who were handling this, which was rather interesting. First time I'd dealt with Syrians in any business or employment profession. And of course, being a senior executive at Daily World newspaper in India, there was going to be some talk about possibly collaborating and doing some things. There was, again, including Cal's Corner Middle East edition. So make a long story short, they told me point blank that because I'm Jewish and things were going to thaw with Israel, and I met people associated with that there, that they wanted me to work the Iran desk, take it to Iran, which of course is natural for me to do that. I've done a lot of reporting on Iran. I had found evidence that a rogue nuclear weapons program and so on. But to make a long story short about that, I declined to agree to do it because the Communist Chinese Party had just bought 10% of the paper and may buy 25%. I haven't bothered to check if that has happened since then, but they made it very clear that Chinese money was going to flow into this thing and into the region. And on principle, and not wanting to just focus only on Iran, there's other issues in the Middle East as well. I thought, well, I don't think I want to be basically a propaganda piece. But they did make it clear that things were going to lighten up with Israel. They were actually going to get where they should be. There was going to be peace. And of course, they can't do anything without permission of Saudi Wahhabia or Saudi Arabia. So that is coming, folks. Eventually, that's going to be the big one. That is effectively, once that happens, when they recognize Israel, will isolate Iran almost exclusively, being as other countries now in the Middle East, Arab countries, Sunni Muslim countries, not Shia, have, of course, recognized Israel's right to exist, even though it's existed for thousands of years, and now have formal relations with them. And it's a win-win for everybody except the terrorists, and that's always a good thing. All right, enough of my yapping. I'd like to introduce our guest now for tonight. It's Mr. Lonnie Franks. He has a nickname of Buck as well, and he can explain that. So if you hear me switch between calling him Lonnie or Buck, there's a reason, method for my madness as usual. In this case, it's because that's his real nickname. So Lonnie, Buck, welcome on Cal's Corner. It's a real honor to have you here, and I sincerely mean this. And just welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Cal. Yeah, it's nice to talk with you. I remember visiting you in Chandigarh and visiting your newspaper. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that would have been the Daily Post newspaper. And then, of course, we were together in Prague. You were a guest at a school I was teaching at. And we were doing a lot of stuff while you were there. And, very fond memories, of course, even in Iowa, of course. And when I left on that plane last time I saw you, physically, at least from the Iowa part, and was going to India to live and settle down for the foreseeable future, however long that was, I'll tell you, it took me about a week to really get out of a funk over that. There was a lot of stuff going on once I hit the ground in India, as you know, but I just missed the hell out of you. So love you very much. And I think by the time people hear what you have to say, because you're just a natural, I think you're going to get a lot more fans. So Lonnie, why don't you start by just briefly introducing yourself and, professionally what you do. And then probably near the end of the segment, certainly in the second one after the first 15 minutes here, I'd like to get into the story, have you tell it, of course, of what had happened with North Vietnam. But let's start first with introducing yourself the way you would do it. Just go for it so people understand who you are and what you do and where you're coming from.
Sure. First of all, since it's radio, I should probably tell people I'm relatively old. I was born in 1948. Memorable that year was that California Supreme Court made it legal for blacks to marry whites. So until 1948, that was illegal in all the United States. So I sort of date myself from one of the first integration milestones in the U.S.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that because if I had to place a bet in Las Vegas, it would be that probably almost no Americans know that. And that's not part of our basic education, Common Core, whatever. And I think that that's terrible.
Yeah, 1948 was sort of an interesting year for a lot of reasons, but I usually start myself off. I grew up in Iowa, but I start off telling people that I wrote my first commercial software application that I sold in 1968. So I sort of think of myself as a software engineer. I went to community college, then the University of Northern Iowa, and have a degree in math. Then I went in the Air Force for 9 years, and I guess we can talk about that in a little bit.
Sure.
After the Air Force, I got a job at National Cash Register, NCR, in 1978 in Dayton, Ohio. And at the time, NCR was a fairly big company. They had offices all around the world, hundreds of places. And they were just starting to make automated teller machines. They had about a 2% market share. And I was kind of lucky because they didn't want to hire me because I had a degree in mathematics, but I could write what are called compilers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote compilers for their ATMs. And then I went around the world teaching everybody how to write programs for ATMs. And ATMs I worked for NCR for 20 years. And it was really a lot of fun. I was their senior software architect, a director of engineering, and even a general manager in Scotland. In Scotland, we built, by the way, in the late 90s, about $2 billion worth of ATMs a year.
Wow.
So it was fun. Had a lot of things. In fact, I liked Scotland because we were able to, as the general manager, I got to pick the menu, and I sort of like haggis. And so I was picking haggis on Fridays, and everybody thought this was stupid. Who wants haggis? And we kept running out of haggis. So I thought that was pretty funny that in Scotland they were afraid people wouldn't want haggis. But they did, and it was really very tasty. And I even bought extra and took it home so my wife Joan could have some haggis with me. After NCR, I went into the software consulting business. And so for the last 20 years, I mostly consulted on large scale, commercially. What I did was consult on large scale software systems. Strictly large software systems almost always are way over budget, over schedule, have very poor quality, and don't have the functionality they really need. So I started a company called Caledonian Project Recovery Limited, and just worked on recovering failed software projects. And there were many to choose from. There was never a lack of clients.
Real quickly, you jogged my memory on something you had told me when we were in person one time. Rob McConnell is in Canada, and you told me you had done a project for the Canadian Railroad.
Canadian Pacific Railway in Calgary.
Yes.
Canadian Pacific Railway was a fun project because they do massive amounts of software to run a railway. And it meant that I got to go to Calgary about a week a month for a long time. And the best part was Friday nights, because Friday night they have a casino in Calgary and they have Texas Hold'em poker tournaments. And it's sort of an oil place. So a lot of people with too much money and too much to drink come and play Texas Hold'em poker. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I guess if you can afford to lose that kind of money. But you mentioned that you had to figure out something to do with the number of cars on the rail tracks at any one time. It was, again, another one of your algorithm thingies that you're famous for.
So yeah, I they were trying to optimize car usage, and there were a lot of different. Anytime a car is sitting, it's not earning you money, and different carriers provide different cars. So it's always important that you use your cars wherever possible. And the manual systems were really hard and led. So they'd get about 80% usage,
Mm.
and we got them up to a little over 95% usage. Well, um, the extra 15% usage is pretty much all profit, right? So
Yeah.
that made them much more profitable. I will say one of the things I learned, I had a Royal Bank of Canada bank account, and Canadian Pacific Railway needed some money, so they put out some bonds. And I asked them if their bonds were any good, and they said, well, we have to pay 9.5%. This was before the economic crisis in 2007, 8, 9.
Mm.
And so I decided buying uh, Canadian Pacific Railway bonds at 9.5% sounded pretty cool.
Because it was guaranteed. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they weren't going to go bankrupt, were they? So they still are paying my 9.5%. So I think I have 2 more years.
Hmm. Oh, good
So
for you.
I try to leverage my consulting to give me some insight into what is a good investment. I like to invest. It's just for fun.
Yeah, I understand. You've made some good investments, actually. So you're free to share those anytime after um, throughout the show that you care to. But yeah, you have done quite well.
I
Um,
think I think we will bore a lot of people if we talk about Apple. So
Yeah, but the way, I mean, I had no idea until you told me about Disney World, what the game Disney was playing to keep people from buying all the land in the areas they were secretly putting that thing together. It never dawned on me that they had to set up all these fronts just to hide the elephant in the room, you know. So
they
of course
not
they'd
money.
have to. Yeah, of course they'd have to. It's just something that, someone not into it like me wouldn't think about. All I know is I remember reading they were going to make Disney World. It's going to be bigger, more expensive, of course. Wonderful. Didn't like the fact it was so far away because, young kid. So I was like, all right, fine. And then next thing I know, years later, it's up and running. But I had no appreciation for the angles you talked about, which was, how they did all this stuff with the land and hid it. And that way they wouldn't, jack up the prices and gouge them and stuff like that. It's like, okay, that makes complete sense. But again, for someone like me, I just hadn't thought about it. Um, we're about 13 and a half minutes into this, so we're going to take a break in a little bit. But when we come back in the second segment here, Lonnie, do you want to continue with, telling people more about yourself and stuff? What I'd like to do is allow, unless you think I think it's enough time, a complete segment on what had happened over there. And
Sure. Let's talk about what I did in the Air Force, and
sure.
then I should mention that my avocation is really in the peace arena. So we should talk a little bit at some time about peace.
Definitely, yeah, in third and four in the latter part here, because again, it segues into all of it, and of course, it's all in the timeline here of your life and what you're known for and everything. All right, so again, joining me, folks, is Lonnie Franks. He also has a nickname well known as Buck, and he can explain that if he wants to after the break here. We're going to take a break and then come back, and then he's going to share with you something that happened, which even Seymour Hersh, yes, the Seymour Hersh, says he's a real American hero, and I'd have to agree with that for what happened. So we'll be back after this commercial break. Welcome back to the second segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show and the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is, of course, Rob McConnell. Now, joining us tonight is a very special guest. I think the world of this man is very close to my heart. His name is Lonnie Franks. His nickname is Buck, as a lot of people know him. We're going to now pick up his story. He's going to tell it, of course, about what happened to him when he was in the military. Lonnie, please go ahead.
Well, I joined the military in 1968. I had actually heard a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Riverside church speech, and he was really against the war in Vietnam. My father couldn't believe that anybody, especially Dr. King, would go against President Johnson, who was pushing the war, of course. So I wanted to go to Vietnam and see what was going on, so I joined the Air Force. I was married. I'd just been married about a year. Anyway, I went in the military. I was in intelligence and was volunteered to go to Thailand, and I went to Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, which is a search and rescue mission kind of group. So we did a lot of search and rescue missions and wrote a lot of reports and learned a lot about the war in Vietnam. And then I came back and after 6 months was sent back to Thailand, but this time in a group that did reconnaissance and bombing. Now, I think the incident most people talk about with me in the military was I had a wing commander who came in one day and said we were going to violate the rules of engagement and make up our after action reports. Since I had been there longer than anybody, I got a good chance to make up lots of fiction about being shot at. We weren't allowed to drop bombs in North Vietnam unless we were being shot at. And so I made up all kinds of stories about, for the after action reports about being shot at. And then, of course, the rest of it is we drop bombs and the bomb damage assessment. Well, I thought this was a little weird too, because I'd been in the Air Force long enough to know that you don't really falsify top secret reports. So I made copies of these reports, and after about, 3-4 weeks, I sent a set of them to my senator from Iowa, Senator Harold Hughes, who was on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He sent it over to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, John Ryan, who sent a 3-star General Wilson to my base, who started interviewing a bunch of people. My name had been redacted, so they didn't really know who had sent these reports in. Mm-hmm. But when Wilson found out that we really had falsified all these reports and John Ryan didn't know anything about it, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, it was an interesting problem for the wing commander, and John Lavelle, who was a 4-star general who had gone to the academy with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, John Ryan. Lavelle was fired. I was finally outed and sent back to the U.S., and I testified in front of the Senate. Lavelle was demoted. And it's one of the few times that the system sort of worked. That is, somebody who falsified reports and bombed well outside of the rules of engagement was held accountable.
How long did the process take for justice as it was understood back then to have been done?
Well, it really wound up. It's not really been done, but in terms of at that time, it took about a year, and it didn't. By the way, it did get me back into the U.S. with a nice bonus. So I went to Florida right when Disney World was opening and SeaWorld was opening. So I got to buy SeaWorld stock and Disney stock and make money on that. But
okay, so more synergy. So you're saying it was about a year from when you first photocopied the documents and sent them to the senator versus about a year later you're in front of the Senate testifying.
Yeah, that was in February, and the Senate testimony was October.
Okay, so same year then. All right.
And it
And
was it was really weird because there were people. I was a staff sergeant, and here was a four-star general, and I just sat down and told the truth. So it wasn't really all that hard for me to testify.
and what was the immediate aftermath, at least at the Pentagon, in response to this hearing and your testimony under oath?
Well, General Ryan was sent out a nice note saying integrity is important, integrity in our reporting is important. Seymour Hersh, I met Seymour Hersh, and he mentions me in a footnote in his Kissinger book. But one of the things he found out was that this was really approved in a tacit way by Nixon and Kissinger. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had gone over to Hawaii to tell Lavelle that he had his back so he could stretch the rules of engagement and it'd be okay. Lavelle had been asking for permission to bomb more aggressively. Unfortunately for Lavelle, speaking of justice, he was demoted. He sort of took all the blame, and nobody had his back, including Kissinger and Nixon. This was an election year, and nobody wanted it to come out that Nixon had approved this type of bombing under the covers. So I think
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
although he was demoted and forced to retire, really kind of got shafted by Nixon and Kissinger. In my case, I applied to become an officer. I actually was, I think, the top of my testing.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Ryan, the four-star general from Iowa, three-fingered Jack, redlined my commission.
Okay.
So I stayed in the Air Force actually, and got more software development training, got some leadership training, and then finally, after 9 years, figured out I was going nowhere in the Air Force, and I got out of the Air Force.
And that was essentially because of this unwritten rule, right? Even though you had done all the right things, you were snitching on one of the boys, so to speak.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
Whistleblowers are not treated very well by the organizations they blow whistles on. It didn't matter that everything was done very underhandedly. And by the way, falsifying top secret reports, one of the reasons I sent it to my senator was, who in the heck were we trying to lie to? These were not being seen by the vast majority of people.
Yeah. In fact, I remember when I was going through Nixon's material, his archives, which were being, piecemealed out, declassified. And I finally got the truth about the Munich massacre and how the U.S. was telling the UN, oh, we condemn terrorism. But at the same time, behind everybody's back, they secretly bribed two West German parliament members to make sure that Willie Brown survived his no confidence vote, and we're not supposed to be involved in those elections. And I also found out that a deal actually had been cut, Buck, between China and Brezhnev and Kissinger and Nixon. Brezhnev wanted the détente so he could stay in power. They were worried, he was worried about his own neck if they détente and missile reduction would fail. And then China, and Nixon was courting that as leverage against the Soviets, and Willie Brown's trying to save his butt. All this is going on. Israel's in the middle, trying to say, hey, let's get these guys after what they did at the Olympics. And that's why Golda Meir finally said, we're just going to go on our own and screw you guys, because if you don't defend us, who's going to? And then they, of course, went around the world and took out the terrorists. So going through that material, that's when I found the reference from Nixon about you. He called you that sergeant. And then it mentions your last name, Franks. And it was in a bunch of records I'd gotten that had been declassified where I saw that stuff, made a PDF, and I think I sent it to you years ago. So that's where I found that stuff. So Nixon knew your name at least, and obviously you impacted him since he had ordered the illegal bombing.
Although that didn't come out until sometime later.
Yeah, years later, and in fact, as I recall, and you of course would know, Lavelle had said he was following orders, right?
He did.
And those orders would have been from President Nixon.
That was what he believed. But he had been told by someone else, not really in his chain of command. And that really is, I thought, was the crux of the issue. That is, if you get an illegal order without having known who it comes from and know the authority it came by,
Right.
can lead to terrible things happening. Oh, I think it came from Richard Nixon, but it was never written down, and I don't have anything but verbal orders. A rogue general could do just about anything he wanted to do.
Yes, definitely.
So governance, especially military governance, is really important. They're nice movies about rogue generals, but I had a rogue general, I thought.
I understand. Now, for people, of course, who don't know this story, Lavelle was essentially put out to pasture by the Pentagon in this scandal, took the fall for it. Nixon got away with it. But you, of course, know what happened when Obama was president.
Yeah, Obama wanted to help. The Lavelle family wanted Lavelle to retire with 4 stars instead of just 2.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the information came out, and so the Senate confirmed him as a 4-star general.
So he was rehabilitated.
He was, and that was probably reasonably fair, although I have to say he made 2 serious mistakes, and that is he accepted orders without knowing the true person giving the order, right? Without knowing for sure who had given the order and if they had the authority to give the order. And secondly, he lost control of his command, because even to the end, he swore he never ordered anybody to falsify any classified documents. I got to tell you, my wing commander, Colonel Charles Gabriel, did directly order me to falsify classified documents. So Lavelle lost control of his command because he didn't know what was going on underneath him.
So you're saying that the colonel, on his own initiative, or the initiative at least not by Lavelle, gave you those orders. Lavelle honestly never knew, never gave any such orders, and the fact this was being done was being kept from him until it came back after your complaint to the senator.
He was surprised when he heard the extent to which we were falsifying reports.
I see. Okay.
He thought we could simply put on a report that somebody shot at us, but it wasn't quite that simple. You know, there are different caliber guns that shoot at you. There are different type of missiles, and you have to see where the gunfire originated from, how many bursts per second. It's fairly complicated to fake being shot at.
Yeah, definitely. You have to devil's in the details, as they say.
By the way, although I had made E5 staff sergeant in 3 years in the military, after this event, I was only promoted one more time, and that was in my last year in the Air Force. But Charles Gabriel, the colonel, made star after star after star and became chief of staff of the Air Force with 4 stars before he retired.
Yeah, he's part of the good old boys, I guess.
So you are right. Whistleblowing is not a career enhancer in the organization you're in.
No, not at all. Not
so
at all.
There were 2 things
Right.
I learned.
Buck, we have to take a break because we're coming up on the segment. We'll begin with segment 3, and then please continue from where we have to break, okay?
Sure.
All right, thanks. Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, our special guest is Lonnie Franks. His nickname is Buck, as a lot of people know him, who are friendly to him, of course. It's a family nickname. He is our guest, and he's recounting everything from brief highlights from his career, as well as an incident that occurred during the Vietnam War, where the U.S. was illegally bombing North Vietnam, and our guest is responsible for the world and top investigative journalist Seymour Hersh and the U.S. Senate for investigating this and exposing it and learning about it. And then, of course, the general who gave those orders took a fall. He was rehabilitated under President Obama, and it appears that Richard Nixon is the guy who did this. And Lonnie was about to tell us something before I had to rudely interrupt him for the break here. Go ahead. Please continue, Buck.
So I was going to say a couple of lessons learned. One was I learned that integrity was a good thing, although not necessarily career enhancing in the military or when you're a whistleblower. Mm-hmm. And competency really, really helps because I was pretty competent at doing these reports. So even in my career as a civilian, I used the concept that all I really need is to be very competent and have a lot of integrity, and good things will happen. And it really has. One of the things that happened in the military that I find really fascinating is I had a terrible conversation with General Wilson, a 3-star general who was the Inspector General for the Air Force. Because he had suggested that I go to the there's an assistant wing commander or vice wing commander and also a colonel, but he was one of the guys flying the missions. So I was pretty sure he knew we were falsifying all these reports. And what it did was there were additional hearings on how in the intelligence community to structure the Inspector General stuff. And I was fascinated this last year when we saw how intelligence inspector generals led to our Donald Trump getting impeached. Because of the independence now of inspectors general in the intelligence community, people can raise issues like I raised, and they're supposed to be protected. Of course, we all know what happened to the people who talked to the inspector general in the intelligence community about Donald Trump's phone call. I don't make any judgments about the phone call, but at least people who raise issues shouldn't be punished for raising issues, in my opinion. And that was the outcome of what I had done led to a lot of the work on how to have inspectors general in intelligence communities, because if you're going to do anything that greatly violates the law, violating the law in intelligence is a whole lot easier because you can hide what you're doing so much more readily.
Yeah, for sure. I will tell you in my own dealings with inspector generals and in going through documents and things like this, what I noticed was there was kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde side to the Obama administration. They are the first one to ever try to throw a journalist in jail just because they wouldn't cough up their sources for material that was leaked in the prior administration. Go figure. You'd think Obama, Mr. Civil Rights, would have dropped that, thing they were going to drop anyway after wasting taxpayer money and bankrupting the reporter practically. And then I know from firsthand experience that they were not doing their jobs like they should have been. In fact, it took Inspector General report to nail the Inspector Generals on that issue, and there were other games played. Like you may remember, it was not a coincidence that there was no Inspector General overseeing the State Department for almost Hillary Clinton's entire time she was Secretary of State. And then by the time they finally get one on board, and this is around the time I had my problems with them first time around, this guy comes in and says not only was she not telling the truth, She never had permission to do this. And if she had asked for it, which she didn't, we'd have said, hell no, it's not policy. You don't put secret stuff on insecure things. So it's gotten better, but I think there's still one more round to go, meaning look at the games like you pointed out that Trump has played, outing and exposing whistleblowers. Yet the headline on Drudge the other day was something like 120 over 120 or 140 million spent on inspector generals this last or whistleblowers in this last year over what we don't know yet. But I think it's got some adjusting to go to fix it. But because we shouldn't allow people to expose whistleblowers, but I have seen an improvement, like you've indicated, towards what you're saying. I'm just saying the first time I saw this go, even with FOIA under Obama, they were nailed by the inspector generals for deliberately dragging their knuckles on that. It's not acceptable.
It is very strange from a governance perspective that the executive branch controls like the Justice Department and the inspectors general. And they serve at the pleasure of the president. So there's really no governance on a president or cabinet members if the president supports them.
Yeah, or you lead to things like this, and this bothers me real quickly before we go back to this other stuff. You have a legal way now to fleece taxpayers, meaning Trump plays golf at his resorts, bills the taxpayers, and it's legal and ethical according to the groups who oversee this. And I'm thinking, wow, imagine what it would be like with no oversight. How many more millions could he make? And it's legal. So it's legal. Where's the issue? Well, the issue is in the principle. Not only could I not play golf at a resort I owned, I'm sorry. I'm too busy to play golf, even not being president. And he promised he wouldn't. So he broke his promise, ran on it, slammed Obama for it. I slammed Obama for it. And then he's making more money playing it because it's ka-ching every time he goes to play his rounds. He makes money. I have a problem with that. But it's legal. I have a problem with that. Anyway, so Obama rehabilitates Lavelle. And you're in private enterprise, you leave the military, you also do teaching, but your heart and passion is peace.
That's right. I started about 10 or 15 years ago with the Dayton International Peace Museum. Mm-hmm. Some of your listeners may have heard of the Dayton Peace Accords.
Yes.
And so the Dayton Peace Accords were negotiated here in Dayton. In fact, at the Hope Hotel out by Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
That's where the aliens are buried in Project Blue Book and Hangar 18. Be careful.
I should go out there. In fact, there are probably a lot of good aliens out there from outer space. Anyway, so I started doing that, and I've been engaged in various things related to peace since then. So I've been involved in the Dayton International Peace Museum, the International Network of Museums for Peace, done a lot of peace hero walks. One of the fun things is there's a Peace Heroes Walk. You can nominate a peace hero. You can get a little placard, and you can walk around handing out little cards about your peace hero. I frequently use Martin Luther King Jr. As my peace hero, but I used lots of other people. I used my brother-in-law, Dr. Ahmed Eid.
Yes.
We had gone to the Middle East a few times trying to work there. He actually died in Egypt during some of the Arab Spring. But at the moment, I'm working mostly with the Rotarian Action Group for Peace and with International Cities of Peace. I think some people may know about Rotary, and they have an action group for peace. And it's a very interesting group trying to teach people some peace techniques or some philosophies. One of the people that I work with a bit is as Captain Paul Chappelle. He's an academy grad, Army Academy grad. He has become sort of an expert on peace. He has a peace studies program where he talks a lot about what it means to be a peace builder. And he has teaching people to be peace literacy is his primary thing. And he says most people don't even know the words you're supposed to use when you talk about peace. They're almost always surprised about peace. And they just don't know even how to talk about it. So,
Well, you're right about that. In fact, with your permission, why don't we do a little back and forth and prove that point quickly, which I think people will be interested in because, as you and I have talked about, the left, for lack of a better term, progressives today, as they like to call themselves, they have hijacked or they have changed some key words and principles so that now you've got people claiming peaceful protests are burning buildings down, where absolutely that's not true. Peace must be no violence at all.
yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Where you worry about how can you be a peaceful protest and in any way support proactive violence. Now, defending yourself is a slightly different issue, but when you initiate the violence, and that's what many people do these days, in fact, they're professional provocateurs. My
Yeah.
favorite, do I have time to read maybe one paragraph
Yeah, go ahead.
from the Common Book of Prayer, a liturgy for ordinary radicals? It's not
Hmm.
that radical, but it's peacemaking. Peace is not just about the absence of conflict, it's also about the presence of justice. Martin Luther King Jr. even distinguished between the devil's peace and God's true peace. A counterfeit peace exists when people are pacified or distracted or so beat up and tired of fighting that all seems calm.
Hmm.
But true peace does not exist until there is justice, restoration, forgiveness. Peacemaking doesn't mean passivity. It's the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice, the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer, the act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that is big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free.
Well, you're right about that. I wish the Democrats and the Republicans put that in their platforms. I wish this were taught in all schools. It reminds me of something Einstein famously said, which of course you're very aware of, that, essentially evil succeeds in this world because good fails to do its job. Kennedy said that, we sometimes have to go to war, ironically, to preserve the peace. But he was very clear that freedom and justice, they require eternal vigilance. And what I see going on today, a lot of people, in my opinion, the Democrats, those who don't support this violence, haven't done a good enough job condemning it. And then, of course, you've got the Republicans on the right. They love it because they say the other side owns it. So it's just a mess. And what I'd like to do, since we got a little less than a minute left before the end of the third segment here, is spend the fourth segment talking about real peace, like what you're talking about, some of the exciting initiatives that are going on now. And also, I'd like you to, if you can, elaborate on how the outbreak of the pandemic has impacted this. One obvious way would be you can't meet as many people in person now, but of course, there's a lot more people suddenly online talking and engaging in ways that they weren't doing it before. So we'll be back after this commercial break. back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Remember, folks, and I know I usually say this at the beginning of every segment, but I didn't do it this time. I didn't do it last time either, actually. But the purpose of Cal's Corner is to cover everything from politics to the paranormal. That's a lot of stuff in between those two subjects, and it's all over the map, but hey, life is very interesting, and I've always had the view that if you only do one thing in life, well, I think life's too short to do only one thing, but that's only my opinion. Speaking of somebody who does a lot more than one thing, our guest is Lonnie Franks, or Buck as he is known affectionately to a lot of people, myself included. He was telling us about peace. He has devoted pretty much, I guess, most of his life now to that cause. And he is a big figure in this area. And I know a lot of people listening to this will say, well, the peace movement, the peace field, the peace what? They don't know because they're not involved in it. And that's unfortunate because when people aren't busy focusing on making peace, they're making other things. And that eventually leads to war. It's guaranteed. So, Buck, why don't we continue the challenges today with what's going on versus, you have a conflict, for example, people will say Black Lives Matter. But if you say all lives matter, does that mean you're being racist? Or, what is racism now? How has peace changed? What would Martin Luther King think or Gandhi think of groups like Black Lives Matter, or what's going on today when stores get looted in the name of peaceful protest, even though it's not really peaceful protest?
Well, having studied a bit about Gandhi and especially Kingian nonviolence, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would feel appalled at anybody who in any way allows looting to go on. One injustice does not solve another injustice. So, there is a problem of justice and fairness in the United States. There's a problem of justice and fairness everywhere, all the time. There are always issues.
Yep.
But that does not justify using violence to try to make a point. So I think King would especially be appalled at what's happening. I'd mentioned earlier about peace literacy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there is a good website, peaceliteracy.org, and there's a very good set of training programs for people on peace. Some of the topics, one of the topics I learned in one of the peace museums in Sweden, in Uppsala, was on bias. And they put out a full set of training material on bias. So learning about bias is fairly important. Learning about nonviolence in general is really important because we tend a fairly violent culture.
Yes.
One of the things that we've been doing in Dayton, Ohio, has been trying to get into the schools peer mediation teams. Mm-hmm. It's where there's conflict in school. You may not know this, but occasionally people get bullied in school, for example.
Yeah.
I've heard bullying happens.
Yes.
But the peer mediation seems to work really well. It's where, eighth grader mediates for two other eighth graders and there's no authority figure. And they just sit down and learn how to talk about what's happening and how people are feeling and why what happened was wrong. And mediation in general is a good thing. And peer mediation in school seems to work really well at resolving conflict, but peaceful conflict resolution is very fascinating. One of the people I learned it from works in New York City. He's actually an artist, but he works as a mediator. And he teaches the New York Police Department peaceful conflict resolution techniques. How do you de-escalate situations? And there's so many good ways to de-escalate a situation. But you have to be taught how to do that.
That's true. You're absolutely right on all this. The expression Murphy never takes a holiday, like Murphy's Law. And
is from Dayton, Ohio, by the way, an engineer from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Mr. Murphy.
Okay, probably after I'm kidding about this, but probably after they got the secret Roswell wreckage back there and reverse engineered it. You have to understand that well, at least for a lot of people hearing this, when they hear Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, whoo, thanks again to the History Channel, Project Blue Book, the mythical series of Dr. Hynek, which thankfully has been canceled, that and Area 51, it's too bad they don't think about peace. They think about aliens, you know. What I was going to say is take the recent shooting in Philadelphia. Tragedy. It is terrible when someone gets shot, unless, I hate to put it this way, they really deserved it, like a terrorist. In this case, the police chief said, I believe it's a woman, that they didn't have tasers. And she apologized for that, saying most of them do. These two didn't. And she blamed budget cuts. And I'm thinking, wow, you send people in suburban hotspots with no tasers, budget cuts. I'm not there. Who am I to speak on it? But it seems to me that no amount of training would have kept that from happening. Tasers would have made a difference. The guy would have gone down. But, when you have autopsy reports showing that somebody died because they were taking something in combination with their oxygen supply being cut off, it gets a little murky. On the other hand, there is racism, prejudice, violence. Lonnie, let me ask you this. You've been around the world more than I have. Why do you think it makes any sense that you can have groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazi Party of America, legal, march, they just need a permit. They can say death to Jews, whatever, and that's allowed, even though hate speech is not protected, my understanding, by the law anymore?
Yeah, divisiveness is a serious, serious problem. And hate speech is terrible. I think you understand a lot of the hate speech that's happened against Israel, for example. And it's kind of nice to see people are putting that aside and starting to, the Sunnis at least, open up relations with Israel. But the hate speech, we've known forever, just is a horrible thing to do and really shouldn't be allowed. In terms of what happens with police departments, we do know that, back to my lessons, I thought integrity and competency are two fundamental things you have to have in order to build trust with people.
Yes.
And to trust in a community. And police departments need to have trust in the communities they police. And so how do you prove they're competent, and how do you prove they have integrity? So every time I see something that shows somebody trying to hide something, or massive levels of incompetency, like, oh, we didn't have money for tasers.
Yeah.
Okay. It winds up that I really believe that the one thing about peace is it's built on trust. It's built on sort of the golden rule.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, one of the things I put out earlier in the year, tweet others as you would be tweeted, has been somewhat misused lately. But I kind of like tweet others as you would want to be tweeted.
Yeah, that's a good play on words. What I won't say surprised me, but I guess in my travels, and you're more traveled than I am, and longer, of course, the golden rule, okay, it's universal in so many cultures, but so many people just forget that. I was really thrown when I first moved to the Czech Republic. I had been raised to believe that, the most spiritual, advanced people on the planet were people who believed in God. And then I end up in the Czech Republic, the most atheistic country in all of Europe. They don't do religious stuff because the 30 Years' War basically ended and started there. And but some of the nicest people, you'd swear they were better Christians than a lot of Christians I knew. And it just saddens me that things are so polarized now, divisive, like you say. Hate speech is the norm. The goalposts get constantly changed, and I saw this during the Obama administration. I'm being blunt with you because I was the target of it myself. Myself, if I criticized him, I was a racist suddenly, and I'm thinking, what? What does that have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with why I'm criticizing him. Nothing at all. I don't really see skin color. It's irrelevant to me. My God, most of the people I know in the world, they're not white. That's just the way it is. That's just genetics.
Yeah.
So, what would you say, as we have a few minutes here? Um, what would you give as far as the best advice, as far as for people listening to this, to don't fall for whatever or pay attention to whatever? Your own words. What would you say?
Well, in all honesty, Christianity is interesting to me because there's dogma and then there's fundamental principles. The
Yes.
fundamental Christian principles, by the way, are principles of lots of different religions, but it's love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And I take love God to be really thankful for free will
Mm-hmm.
and and if you think about people who just follow dogma, they're not using their free will and they're not using their reason, and therefore they are not loving God. Now, the love your neighbor is pretty easy because, in all honesty, it's the golden rule. But one thing about that I like about love is that with love, you should be as concerned of the other person's well-being as you are about your own well-being. So the way you express love is frequently to be concerned about the other person's well-being, even when it isn't in your own best interest necessarily, or your best interest. You might sacrifice yourself a little for someone else if you truly love someone. But the belittling, the name calling, the bullying is just a horrible thing that happens. So my philosophy is love God and love your neighbor. Believe in science because we have free will and reason, and believe that the other people on this earth are as good as you are and deserve to be loved as much as you deserve to be loved.
Well, then what you're saying is that all lives matter. You're not singling out a single race. And I'm not putting you on the spot on that. It's just that as somebody, me personally, has always believed all lives matter ever since I understood basic genetics as a kid. I it breaks my heart to see it become this or that or this when it should be all and everyone. And if everybody believed in all and everyone, they would do everything like you mentioned, which would be to be proactive. But first things first, put the resources there, get involved with the community, and these things just wouldn't happen. And also, for those listening to this, we have to distinguish, of course, and I'm sure Buck agrees, between the religion and what it preaches, a religion, versus what some people do claiming to be in the name of that religion. Islam is a good example. There are people who practice it in ways where they're terrorists. There are those who practice it where they're peaceful and loving. That's certainly almost every Muslim I know. And most of them are that way, let's be honest. Jews and Christians, same thing. They're not burning crosses on the ground like the Klan would, claiming to be Christians, and they're not. So we have to distinguish between that. It's too tempting, in especially polarized times, to say, oh, those Christians. No, it's not those Christians. It's the one who bastardize the message of love thy neighbor, love God, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. There's nothing wrong in that. And it's quite old, and it's really Judaism because Jesus was a Jew. But a lot of people don't know that. So, all right, boy, this is a very emotional subject. Buck, I'd like to thank you for being on the show. Is there a website where people can visit your stuff?
Well, the peaceliteracy.org is probably the best website for the peace stuff. If you want to see the recent stuff I've done, you can go to aidtoall.org. Aidtoall.org is a website to help people who hurt COVID virus a chance to get some funds.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe.